Good evening, dear friends. Thank you for checking in. Sunday evening, fourth Sunday of John's Tide, this lengthy period in which we think, pray, contemplate the life and work of John, known as the Baptizer, forerunner of Jesus of Nazareth, perhaps the first human being to come into existence. I called this evening's contemplation the legacy of John. And often when we think of legacy, we think of something magnificent, a monument or a sum of money given to a worthwhile institution. The legacy of John is perhaps not quite so concrete. Of course, there are hundreds, perhaps thousands of artistic representations of John, many paintings, sculptures, reliefs, music, I'm not so sure. But I'm thinking back even to that very first chapter of the Gospel of John that we've looked at here, and the scene that we just briefly discussed 2 weeks ago when John was standing by the Jordan and Jesus walks by, and John indicates Jesus to two of his disciples and says, "See, the Lamb of God." Jesus hears this, looks, and the two disciples, one of whom is named by name, Andrew, the other is simply called the other disciple, one of those mysterious references, perhaps, that occur throughout the Gospel of John. And they ask him, where does he stay? He answers, "Come and see." And they go to see where he stays and stay there the whole day. And then a kind of a chain reaction takes place. Andrew finds his brother Simon. Simon speaks with Jesus, and Jesus gives him the name Cephas, which will be translated Peter, or the rock. The next day, Jesus wants to leave for Galilee, and he finds Philip and says to him, "Follow me." Philip finds Nathanael and says he has found the Messiah. Nathanael doubts, can something good come from Nazareth? "Come and see," says Philip. Then there's a kind of a meeting between Jesus and Nathanael, and Jesus recognizes in Nathanael an initiate of a high order. And also he stays. Now, you might wonder if you've studied the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and you see that the calling to follow Jesus occurs quite differently. Jesus is walking along the Sea of Galilee and sees two fishermen, Andrew and his brother Peter, and calls them, and they follow him. And then they find James and John, the sons of Zebedee, and he follows them, and so on. This is one of the great theological exercises that people try to explain why the four Gospels, especially John, vis-a-vis the others, create conflict. How can it be that there are two stories? One idea that is brought in by Rudolf Steiner into the discussion is that the Gospel of John takes place on a different level, from a different viewpoint, from a different state of consciousness, where we might say Matthew, Mark, and Luke write the earthly story inspired by the angelic message. John writes the story in the angelic realm, in the realm of what Rudolf Steiner calls imagination. And not imagination in the sense of I fantasize a wonderful story and write it down or paint it or write music. It's one kind of imagination. In the spiritual sense, we say we're living in the realm of pictures or in the realm of archetypes, of those occurrences which on the one hand are specific, but on the other hand show the greater picture, the picture as it is projected from the spiritual world, from that world of intentions, the world of Christ, the world of the planets, the world of the stars, the world of the Father. And we might say the Gospel of John portrays the life and the works of Jesus Christ, but also John, the Baptizer, from this realm of spirit, perhaps to be compared with what we experience at night, when we dream or when we enter a higher realm and see pictures, hear stories about things that perhaps are intended to occur the next day or in the future. I leave it at that for now. But part of John's legacy he passes on at this moment to Andrew and the other disciple, his disciples, who undoubtedly have spent time with John, have taken in some of John's experience, some of what he's brought from his lives on earth, some of what he has preached and taught and done. Perhaps they've learned his technique of baptizing. Perhaps they have lived in the desert, nourished themselves with hard fruits and honey, have lived partly this ascetic life that John models for them. We don't know the details, but when we hear that Andrew and the other were disciples of John, we can assume they have taken on some of his practices and characteristics. And these two then now become followers of Jesus of Nazareth, according to this imaginative picture, the first two, handed over to him, so to speak, by John. I'm going to jump around a little bit. If we look into the Matthew Gospel, a story that is not told by John, but is told by Matthew, Mark, and Luke, we encounter John in prison. He's a rabble-rouser. He's got people thinking and acting. Things could change if people follow John. Imagine that. He calls for transformation of heart and mind. And this disturbs the ruling class, whether they be part of the Hebrew establishment or part of the Roman occupation force. Anyone who rocks the boat, raises rebel, is dangerous. And now John has scolded the Tetrarch Herod because he has something going on with his brother Philip's wife. We don't quite know what, we don't know the details. Whatever it is not kosher as far as John is concerned. John is in prison, and at the beginning of this story, Herod makes a strange remark. He has observed and heard of the work of Jesus of Nazareth, and reflecting on the fact that he has had John executed, he says, has John arisen in this man that he does such wondrous deeds and says such amazing things? This is an interesting indication for us that John, who is then in the course of this chapter 11 beheaded, his disciples come and carry away his body and bury it, and they go and tell Jesus. One of those little tiny details where you could just say, well, of course they went and told Jesus. Just like we turn on the news and hear there was a tornado in Oklahoma, they went and told Jesus. Okay, fine. But wait, every word in the gospel we lay on the gold scale. This beginning of the story and the end carry little indications that there are other forces at work, and that there are perceptions of other levels of existence, of being, than simply the story, the earthly story of John's imprisonment and this rather trivial reason for beheading him and his death. They went and told Jesus. Chronologically, now would be the time when Herod beholds that seemingly the spirit of John the Baptizer has revived and is living in Jesus and his works. And indeed, we find confirmation of this event in the work of Rudolf Steiner, who tells us that after his death, after his earthly death, his beheading at the hands of Herod, John, son of Zechariah, becomes the guiding spirit for the circle of apostles. To be sure, they have Jesus with them at this point, who leads them, who teaches them, who shows them what to do, to baptize, to heal, to raise the dead, to inspire others, to comfort. But John, we might say, unites himself in a deeper way with the disciples, unites himself into their very soul life, into their life forces, into their soul powers, guiding their spirit. Jesus knows that he will not be with them for a very long time. And now we might say, or we might ask, has John become the guiding spirit for Christianity as a whole? It makes you wonder, should we not perhaps from time to time call on John? Could we not call up this picture of John as being the one who in times of doubt, who in times of hitting rock bottom, because he did himself. I back up a little bit. John is in prison before his death. One wonders if John himself did not have a moment where he wonders, is this the one? Is this the man I baptized? And he sends his disciples to Jesus and asks, are you the one we were expecting, or should we wait for another? Doubt is allowed on the spiritual path. Doubt which leads to real questions, to real introspection. John has been thrown in prison. His outer life has come to a complete standstill. His proclamation, his baptism, the work that he was sent to do in the outer world is no longer possible. Who would not doubt? But he doesn't go completely within. He doesn't get lost in his own doubts, but he sends disciples to Jesus and asks, are you the one, or should we wait for another? And Jesus does something very important. He says, look, see. See with your own eyes what is happening right in front of you. The blind see, the deaf hear, the disabled move on their own powers, the dead are raised. And then something very central to this whole moment. The gospel is proclaimed to those who can hear it. Now we come to a turning point in human development. John, the representative, the epitome, the blossom of the old ways, of the ways that have led humanity to this point. These forces come to an end But they don't simply drain away. They follow their own advice. They transform into new forces. Into new forces that begin to perceive the world on their own. See. Jesus said at the very beginning, come, get into motion and see. Come and see. And now John's disciples are being asked to do the same. See the blind, the deaf, the disabled, the dead. The gospel is proclaimed to those who can hear. And here we find, I think, the greatest legacy of John is that he stands at this point of transformation, where the ways that he has accompanied as his spirit, as the epitome of humanity from the very beginning, who has stood and watched over the development of the human being in soul, in spirit, in body, now stands next to that one who takes up the reins, who takes up the challenge of leading humanity into its next great phase of development, into that phase of development where each individual will be challenged, will be called out, ecclesia, will be called out of his own shell, out of their own nationality, out of their own ethnicity, out of their old beliefs, into a new belief which calls each human being to come and see, to see for oneself what is happening, and to make one's own assessment. Do I follow or do I not? There are really two choices in Christianity. It's hard to say that, hard to experience, but those voices that call us, we can respond, each in his or her own way, of course, each in their own intensity, each following their own ability to do so. So John's legacy is very much that of transforming, of standing at this turning point of time, not only as a passive witness watching, but one whose own experience contributes to the stream of development that will continue now with Jesus of Nazareth as he moves toward Jerusalem, toward the ultimate sacrifice, and then into that phase of early Christianity. Dear friends, we've spent a long time looking at the figure of John the Baptizer. We began in June. The time of John runs this week for us in liturgical sense. We will celebrate the service with the beautiful prayers about John until Saturday, and then move into that period we call Trinity Tide in the Christian community. And I'm going to suggest for these evening contemplations, connecting to the study that we're going to take up here in Chicago on our Thursday morning group, we're going to be studying the Apocalypse of John, making a huge leap from this moment of John the Baptizer, more toward the end of the century, the first century, where John the evangelist then has been banned to the island of Patmos and has these remarkable visions of the future of humanity. We want to be studying that in our group beginning sometime in August, and I will be holding little contemplations on Sunday after the service, and I will bring the fruits of those contemplations here in the evening. So I hope to see you next week, looking at the beginning of the Apocalypse of John, or the Revelation to John, and I wish you a good evening. I see some folks from Australia. It's already tomorrow there, or today. So have a blessed day. Think of John when you sit down to ponder or to doubt or to wonder. Remember what the gospel said. Egeneto anthropos. There came into existence a human being, sent by God. His name was John. He came to bear witness to the light, that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but he came to bear witness to the light. I hope in these last weeks we've come to some greater insight in how John, but moreover how we can bear witness to the light. Blessings.